Hey, what is going on everyone? It's me, Mr. Mario, and in this video we're going to be taking another look at the PlayStation Vita and checking out how to modify this system if you're running a PlayStation Vita, PlayStation TV, or Vita TV of some kind using firmware 3.73 or lower. At the time of recording, this is the highest firmware for the PlayStation Vita, and this is what it is going to work with, this whole process here. Now, some people might be wondering what's going on because I actually did a video covering this, a full video just encompassing everything that we're going through here on firmware 3.73 somewhat recently. Well, just like that, somewhat recently yet again, there has been some new methods and breakthroughs that really make this process faster and easier than I ever would have imagined. And that's all thanks to a piece of software called VitaDeploy that we're going to be using, and it's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting for us. Now, there's nothing wrong with the older video. You can still follow that start to finish for the most part and get to where you need to go, but this is going to be a bit more updated and there's going to be less steps involved, but it will still get you to the same place. Now, it is worth giving credit, of course, where credit is due, and I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to the kind folks maintaining vita.hacks.guide. This is actually where I had seen this method posted, and it was brought to my attention by several commenters. Well, I ended up looking through this here, and really this video is going to be a visual adaptation of what you can find on vita.hacks.guide with a few tweaks here and there, and I'll be explaining that as well too. So just big thank you to the maintainers over there for keeping this written and getting this information out there. Really, I'm just going to be doing a visual of it. Now, to get set up, there will be a few prerequisites that you will need if you're trying to follow along. First of all, we are of course going to need our PlayStation Vita, PlayStation TV, or Vita TV. I am using a PlayStation TV for this just so I can directly record all the video here, but of course this process is going to be the same across all of these systems. Next up, we will need to make sure we are on a internet connection. So make sure that you are on a internet connection on your Vita. I'm going to be referring to the system as a Vita from here on out. And on top of that, make sure it is going to be on the same network as your Windows-based computer. We will be using a Windows-based computer for this, and we're going to have to share a network connection across the two devices just so we can transfer some files to and from the console and computer. If you have a PlayStation Vita 1000 model, you will need a memory card. You cannot use an SD card just yet, and it does not have any internal storage. However, if you have a PlayStation Vita 2000 model, or you have a PlayStation TV or a Vita TV, you can continue on with the built-in 1 GB of storage. But just keep in mind, if you have a 1000 model, you have to have a memory card in order to continue on with this. And continuing on here, you are going to need to be on firmware 3.73. It would be recommended to be there, and you will need a PlayStation Network account on the console itself and registered and all that good stuff. So we can check to see where we're at right here. Over at your system, you can go down to your system settings, enter the settings over here, go over to system down here, and go into system information. As you can see, this console is running firmware 3.73, which at the time of recording is the latest firmware available and the latest firmware that this method is going to work for. If you are on a lower firmware, it would be recommended to get up to 3.73 just so you can follow along. If you need to update manually, for example, if there is a newer firmware out which supersedes this here, I do have a separate video covering how you can manually update your PlayStation Vita. And it's pretty simple to do, thankfully. It just has a few prerequisites you need to follow, but it will walk you through the whole process. But either way, it would be recommended to be on firmware 3.73 exactly to follow along with this. Next up, we do need to verify our PlayStation Network account on here, and I would recommend changing a few settings. So first of all, go down to PlayStation Network and sign into the account that you have set up on your system. Once you're set up here and signed in, go down to System Activation, go to Game, and activate your system. It will just take a few seconds, and activating should be complete. Next, we can go back, exit out of this. Now, go down to System, go to Auto Start Settings, and untick this as well. So we do not want to download an update file for system software, and that's really about it. All these others are fine, but we do not want to accidentally update our console. So now that we got that out of the way, I think it's good to continue on at this point. To get started, we will need to move over to our PC, and we're going to need 2 pieces of software, at least for the Vita itself. There's going to be a few others, and I'll get into that, but there's going to be 2 that are going to do our heavy lifting. The first is going to be Final h-encore or Final HE. The GitHub is linked down below for this in the description, just like all the other links that I'm going to talk about here. So navigate over to the GitHub page, go over to Releases, and you want to download the latest release. It's going to be a 7Z file, and save this somewhere you can easily find it. Next, we're going to need VitaDeploy. Again, link will be down below in the description. Go to the GitHub page, go over to the releases section, and from here, you're going to need to download the latest VitaDeploy-fhe.zip file. This is the exact one you want. You want the zip file, you do not want the VPKs. Again, I'm stressing this, you want the VitaDeploy FHE zip file. If you need something to extract that 7-zip archive that Final HE comes in, I would recommend 7-zip. It's easy to download, install, and it's free. Now, over at your PC, you should have these 2 files downloaded, VitaDeploy, which you can just leave sitting there for the time being, and Final HE, which you need to extract into its own folder. If you're using something like 7-zip, for example, you right-click, go to 7-zip, extract to its own folder name right here. Here you should have a Final HE folder, and the inside of the folder should look something like this. We really don't need to worry about the other 2 folders, we just need the Final HE.exe file. The only other thing we need to do here is grab our VitaDeploy FHE.zip, cut it, so we're going to move it, and paste it right here. So that's all there is to it. You should have your Final HE.exe, and next to it your VitaDeploy-FHE zip. It should all look exactly like this. If you do not have your file name extensions enabled and you're using Windows, you can click on View and enable file name extensions just like that on Windows 10 or Windows 11. Now all we need to do at this point is double click Final HE to get it up and running. If you end up getting a message like this when you fire up Final HE at any point, you want to allow access through your firewall. This is expected so it can communicate to and from your PlayStation Vita. If you're still running into connectivity issues, it would be worth, if you're on a VPN, disable your VPN for the time being. Try and restart Final HE, try and reboot the entire PS Vita itself, and maybe even reboot your computer, just so you can get a connection going on there. But this will hang up several people where they might run into an issue where it's not allowed through their firewall. Right here, it's giving us our instructions on what to do. We need to launch Content Manager on the PlayStation Vita. So let's go ahead and go back to our system and do that. Over at your Vita, go over to the Content Manager and fire it up. Now go down to Copy Content and go over to PC. Now right here, you'll need to register a device. It's going to look for computers on your network that are hosting this. So my computer I know is called Angel. You can press X right here. And there is going to be a code that you will need to pull from Final h-encore. You should see the PSN account that you've associated to your console right here where it says registering device, and you should find the PIN number right there. That's the same PIN number you need to enter on your console. Once you've entered that PIN, all you need to do is hit register. Next up, we can hit next. It should connect out. And once we're connected, we can just stay right here. Back over at Final HE, there's going to be 2 settings that you need to enable here. First of all, it's trim h-encore to 7 megabytes. Make sure you do that just for storage reasons here. We don't need all that extra storage here that the application will need. And next up, you can go over to the small arrow here. You should see an arrow on the right of Final h-encore. You're going to want to click on this and then enable VitaDeploy. So your Final h-encore should look exactly like this. You should have VitaDeploy and trim h-encore enabled. With both of those checked here, you can click on Let's Go, and it's now going to download all the required files, compile them as needed, and get them served up to your PlayStation Vita. This is going to take a few minutes, so just sit here and let it do its thing. So once it's all done, it's going to give us our instructions right here, and you can just keep this up and running. Make sure you do not close out of Final HE, and now follow these instructions on the Vita. With Content Manager still up and running on the Vita, hit PC to PS Vita or PSTV system, go to Applications, go to PS Vita, and there should be two applications here, h-encore and VitaDeploy. Check both of these and hit copy. Hit OK, and give it a few moments. It's now going to pull these down from your computer, which is currently all being hosted from Final HE. Again, if you run into an issue at this point here, some people are not able to download these for whatever reason, this is where you might want to restart Content Manager on your Vita, or restart Final HE on your computer, or even restart both the devices themselves, but just give this some time here if it's transferring. Now with all of that done, we can press the PlayStation Vita button, close out of here. From here, you should have two applications on your home screen, one being h-encore and the other one being VitaDeploy. That's exactly what we need. And over at your computer, you can now close out of Final HE. We no longer need this application. We've transferred over what we need. So let's get our system modified. We're currently on firmware 3.73, and to do this, you're just going to fire up h-encore, start this up, say yes to earn trophies here, and wait. Do not touch your system, do not touch your controller. Now, occasionally that might happen where you just get a white screen and your whole system ends up restarting. That is perfectly fine. It can happen on occasion with h-encore. If it happens, well, just go into h-encore, start it up, say yes, and try again. Just showing this here because honestly, it might take a few tries. It might not work the first or second time, but just keep trying until it works. And here we go. This is an example of it working. So it is all working just fine at this point, thankfully. From here, all we need to do is hit X over exit. It's now going to bring us back here, and we can now go over to settings, go over to HENkaku settings, which you should now see up at the top. Make sure enable unsafe homebrew has been enabled. And we can now exit out of here and close out of that completely. Next up, we can go to our second application we've installed called VitaDeploy and fire this up. So it should look a little something like this, and it's going to look pretty similar to any of the other Vita menus here. So first we just need to go to App Downloader, go over to VitaShell, and enable VitaShell. Now hit download these selected apps and wait. Right here, you're going to come to a menu like this, and you just need to install VitaShell. So hit down, and this should now be highlighted, this vitashell.vpk file. Press X, press yes, yes yet again, and there we go. That's all there is to it. So you can now hit the triangle button while highlighting VitaShell, go down to delete, and hit yes. Now press the PlayStation button to exit out of here. And if we come back over to our home screen, we should now have VitaShell, which you can now open up VitaShell, and it should open just fine. So congratulations, your system is now technically modified, and you should be able to now say that you've installed your first piece of homebrew successfully. That's great, but we're still on 3.73, so we're not fully done. There's a few more things that we need to do here. This next step here is now going to involve downgrading our console. Now, the reason why we want to downgrade our system and not upgrade our system is because there is another component of HENkaku. It's a separate piece you can install called Enso. Now, Enso allows us to have a permanent custom firmware. That means whenever you turn on your Vita, you are immediately able to launch any sort of homebrew and even use extra plugins that people who do not have a cold booting system might not be able to make proper use of. So for this, we can navigate over to VitaDeploy and launch it yet again. Once you open up VitaDeploy, you can go down to install a different OS. Now, it is not a whole different OS. This is just going to be a different firmware. And there's two options that you can really pick from here. First of all is a quick 3.65 installation. This is going to downgrade you to firmware 3.65, and it's going to select a certain preset. Now, I'm going to be using firmware 3.60, and the reason why I'm going to be using that is because I believe firmware 3.60 would still be great, especially if you are in a situation where something goes wrong and you have to completely format your Vita. You see, if you have to start from scratch, firmware 3.65 is still going to require a PlayStation Network account, while firmware 3.60 will not. And we can still utilize everything we need to there. So what you can do if you're going to go to firmware 3.60 is navigate to PlayStation Update Package, go to Target Firmware, do the 3.60 pup. Now the tie-in configuration could look a little bit daunting here, and to see what's going on, we can refer to the VitaDeploy GitHub page. You see, vanilla here is tie-in and HENkaku only. Recommended is going to be HENkaku with some core homebrew plugins, and R plus YAMT is recommended preset with the YAMT storage tool. That is just if you want to use a SD2 Vita here in the future. Now, Quick Install does install 3.65 with the R plus YAMT preset. So if we're going to be doing Quick Install, just for the sake of anybody who's doing 3.65, if you're on 3.60, you could also follow along by selecting this one. However, if you want to use recommended, just be sure and note down what you are going to be using. So for this, I'm going to be using R plus YAMT, just so everyone's going to use the same thing, even if you decide to do the quick install. Then select Install Enso. So your setup should look a little something like this here. And once you're all ready to go, hit install the selected firmware, put your controller down, and wait. This is going to go through the process of downloading all the necessary homebrew, all the necessary tools, as well as the firmware we need to perform the downgrade. And here we go. At this point, this is going to separate which firmware you will be installing. You see, most PlayStation Vitas out there can handle downgrading to firmware 3.60, but at this screen, you need to look at current and factory firmwares. The firmware you are downgrading to cannot be lower than the factory firmware. So as you can see, my factory firmware is 3.30, and I'm targeting 3.60, which this will work for. However, if your factory firmware is higher than 3.60, but 3.65 or lower, that means you'll have to use the quick 3.65 install option. So that's when you might need to use a higher one. And unfortunately, if your factory firmware is higher than 3.65, you will not be able to take Enso on this. However, 3.60 or 3.65, if you're going to choose that downgrade, we can go ahead, check everything here, make sure all looks good, and press X to confirm. This is going to give you a warning here, so make sure you read this, understand it. Once you agree to the terms here and you understand them, you can continue on once prompted. If you choose to continue, put down your controller, put down your console, don't touch anything, and let it do its thing until it fully restarts on the lower firmware. You do not have to intervene at this point. Now, when your system boots back up, it's going to boot up the same, and it's going to look about the same. However, it is going to handle differently under the hood. Not only it's going to be on a lower firmware, but it should also have Enso installed on it if you chose that option, which is going to allow us to have cold booting HENkaku or cold booting custom firmware. You'll be able to note this down because if you look in the top right corner, you should see that your battery life is now a percentage, so if that changes there already, that is great. And you can also verify this by going down to VitaShell and firing it up. And if it's able to launch successfully without any other intervention, then as you can see right here, you're able to boot up Homebrew with no issue. Finally, we can close out of here. We can go over to our settings page, fire up settings, and we're going to check our firmware version. So you can come down here over to System, go to System Information, and as you can see, this is running firmware 3.60 or firmware 3.65 if you chose that. So if you did that, congratulations, you've now successfully, in one easy step there, downgraded your system, had it modified, and have Enso set up on it so it is permanently modified on cold boot. Now there's a few other applications that we can download here. So first of all, we can go to VitaDeploy and launch VitaDeploy yet again. Now over at VitaDeploy, we can go to App Downloader, and we're going to download, it'd be recommended to download the Vita Homebrew browser, and if you have downgraded your firmware, you need to download iTLS installer. So you can hit X on that right there. You can also look at all of these other installers and setups here, and there's so many great things, but these are just going to be the two that we're going to focus on for now. So either way, we can go to download the selected apps, and we should just be able to download those two pieces of Homebrew. And here we go. At this point, just like before, highlight iTLS, press X, and press X on both of these to install. Next up, we're going to do the exact thing with the Vita Homebrew browser. The Vita Homebrew browser, it's not required, but it is going to be recommended just because it will allow you to easily access the world of PlayStation Vita Homebrew directly on your console. And from here, we can just hit triangle on each of these, delete, yes, and do the same thing on the second one. So from here, we can exit out of this, come back over, and go over to iTLS Enso. Press start, and wait a few minutes. And once it comes up, you'll just want to install the full iTLS package. Give it a few moments to install, and it's then going to automatically reboot the console once it has been installed. Once that's been installed, you can also check out the Vita Homebrew browser if you wish to, and we can just try this out right now, get it out of the way. So you can hit start right here, and I'm just going to bring this up as a heads up. First of all, you will need to be connected to the internet for this, and second, the first time you load up Vita Homebrew browser, you're going to get stuck on this black screen right here. And you're not actually stuck here, it just needs to go through all the prerequisite tasks that it needs to in the background. The first time you launch this is going to be the longest launch period for it. You might have to wait a few minutes, but do not let your Vita go to sleep. Just let it do its thing, let this run here, and eventually you are going to see the Vita Homebrew browser. And here we go. It took me about 3 minutes on my connection, but if you want to check out anything, you are more than welcome to. There's so many awesome just Homebrew games, ports, emulators, and of course utilities as well. And if you ever want to download anything, you can just come in here and hit download, and it will do the install and everything for you. But that's about all there is to it here for the Vita Homebrew browser. Now we should also look into our settings here, and to do this you can go into Settings, and we'll need to navigate to HENkaku Settings. Make sure Enable PSN Spoofing, Unsafe Homebrew, and Version Spoofing have been enabled. Go to Spoofed Version, and you're going to want to put in here, not only now but in the future, the latest system software version. So for example, if a firmware 3.75, for example, comes out tomorrow, you'll need to go in here, change this to 3.75, exit out of this, and then reboot your device. And upon reboot, you should be spoofed on that higher firmware version. To verify that this is all working, you can exit out of here, go over to the PlayStation Store, for example, and fire this up. Now, if you are able to access the PlayStation Store, congratulations. That means not only your firmware spoofing is working, but iTLS Enso has also been installed and is successfully working. With that, we can close out of the store because we're not going to need that access just yet, but there's going to be one last thing here. You see, the PlayStation Vita itself has a pretty great setup here, and there are several different plugins. This is how the custom firmware works. As opposed to having custom packages for everything, you install plugins to do what you want the firmware to do and add on additional features. Well, thankfully, this whole process, thanks to VitaDeploy, ends up adding several really awesome default plugins that I would recommend. But if you're wanting more, I'll also show you an easy way of doing that. To do this, we'll need to fire up VitaShell, and we're going to transfer over a piece of Homebrew. Once you fire up VitaShell, you can press the Start button, go over to Select button, and change this to your preferred method of transferring files. So if you're going to follow along with USB, you can adapt it for that, but I'm going to be using FTP, so we're going to be using our connection here for this, our network connection between our computer and our system. Press circle, then press the select button, and you should now open up a FTP server on your console. Keep this up and keep this address in mind. You will need these numbers here soon. There's going to be 2 downloads here for an FTP transfer. The first of which is going to be HENkaku. This is what I'm going to be recommending for FTP transfers, and this is really if you don't want to use anything else, if you want a recommendation. If you're using your own piece of FTP software or method, that's fine. But if you're not sure of what to use, I recommend using HENkaku. And second, we're going to be downloading AutoPlugin 2, which will make your plugin downloads and just setup here much easier. So for this, you can go to the AutoPlugin 2 GitHub repository, go to Releases, and download the latest AutoPlugin 2.vpk file. Now, once you open up HENkaku, you can open up a new session, and here we can create a new site. You want to change this to FTP, and this is where you're going to need the information from your Vita. From here, you're going to need to grab the IP address and port number from your Vita, because we're going to plug those into HENkaku. Over at HENkaku, enter in your specific IP address, and that's a local IP address that you're connecting to on your Vita. The port number is going to be 1337, and you're going to do an anonymous login. And if you wish to save this, you can. I'm not going to save this here, but I'm just going to log in. And it's going to look a little something like this. Now, this looks a little daunting, but you'll need to go over to UX0. That's going to be your memory card. And here, usually I recommend creating a new folder, which you can do right-click, New Directory, and call it VPK. Inside the VPK directory, you can then transfer over your AutoPlugin to VPK. You can either drag and drop it over, or you can just navigate over to where you need to on your computer on the left side, and then you can right-click, upload, press OK, and wait a few moments. Once that's all done, we can disconnect from here by clicking on the X button or just closing out of HENkaku. Back over at the Vita, press circle on cancel, go over to UX0, go down to VPK, highlight AutoPlugin 2, press X, and press X yet again once prompted, and wait for this to perform the installation. Once it's all installed, you can hit triangle, go down to delete, and yes, to delete AutoPlugin 2. Now we can exit out of VitaShell, navigate back to the home screen, and as you can see, AutoPlugin 2 should be sitting there. From here, you can go ahead and fire up AutoPlugin 2 and see what this is all about. So here we go. Now, if you want to check out plugins or install any newer ones, you can go to Vita Plugins, Install Plugins, and as you can see right here, any plugins that you already have installed are going to have a green dot next to them. So for example, Zero-Syscall 6 has already been installed, but something such as Analog's Enhancer has not been installed. And there are so many awesome things that you can go through right here. So I just recommend going through and seeing what all is available. You can check out the descriptions on all of these, of course, and figure out what exactly is going to work for you on your setup. If you get out of here, you can also uninstall plugins. So these are the plugins that you already have set up. All these have already been installed by VitaDeploy, except for iTLS. That one we installed ourselves. You can also go down to plugin updates if you wish. And this should update all of the plugins that do need updates if there's any that are available. So there we go. We have updated all of these here. We can go back. And for PSP plugins, this is just something different. You do have to have Adrenaline already set up, which is the ePSP built in the system, or the PSP emulator, which you can unlock. So I do have a video covering that specifically, but there's also plugins for that whenever you want. There's also extra downloads here if there's extra pieces of Homebrew that you're looking for, which you can just read up on these as well. But let's really look at plugins, and let's go ahead and pick one plugin just so you all can see it. So let's see what I'm going to install just as an example. One thing I like to do on the Vita is set a custom warning. So I'm going to use custom warning version 2 to install this. You just press the X button on it. And here there are going to be some plugins that require some extra setup. So here you need to literally put in your custom warning. So let's just go ahead and put something in here. Now that that's been installed, that's about all we have to do. So if there's nothing else that you want to install, you can either press the start button or you can go back and go down to exit. And what it will do is it's going to reboot the console itself. So press X on here and wait. And if we look, here we go. Check that out. We have the custom splash screen coming up. So we were able to install and set up a new plugin, and that's how you're able to install and set up all the other plugins, or of course uninstall them if you wish. Well, that is about it for this video here. You know, compared to other methods of setting this all up on a PlayStation Vita from start to finish, it doesn't even feel like I really did all that much, but hopefully you feel a bit accomplished getting to this point here. Now, what other recommendations do I have? Well, first of all, do not update your system firmware. That is why we went in at the beginning. We went over to our settings and we made sure to disable downloading system firmwares. To double check that, you can go to System, Auto Start Settings, and disable this download update file for system software. However, on top of all this, of course, you now have access to the Vita Homebrew browser, so you can just go ahead and browse the awesome world of Homebrew. AutoPlugin 2, of course, with some fantastic other plugins that you can check out and easily install. And really, I mean, that's about it at this point. You can continue on. There's so many more things that you can do, such as setting up a SD to Vita on your system, so you no longer only have to use the expensive memory cards. You can then use much better, faster, and cheaper micro SD cards if you want to on your Vita. As I said, you can install Adrenaline, which is the PSP emulator, the full PSP emulator buried in the system, which you are able to unlock and use like a full custom firmware PSP, all within the power of your Vita. So you have access to Vita games, PSP games, and, well, PS1 games technically, and so much more because you have Vita and you have PSP Homebrew. And on top of that as well too, I mean, I'm talking about games, you're then able to, you know, play all your Vita games you want, but you can even back up your games as well too. Thankfully, you have Zero Syscall 6, which will allow you to play games which require a higher firmware, and we also have no NPDRM, so you can back up your games and play them in that format quite easily. I do have videos covering those, and I go into more depth in those respective videos. However, that is about it for this video. I hope this helped out. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, a like would absolutely be appreciated. If you didn't like it, a dislike is fine as well too. But as I always say, this is Mr. Mario, signing off. Thank you all for watching, everyone.